Late December, around the holidays, almost time for the new year, Call of Duty Black Ops 3 was loved in the trolling bros for the amazing zombies and underrated multiplayer, and it was about time for another sniping tournament. However, things would have to change, fast. Season 4 was not well received within the group, growing tired of the single elimination bracket, the conferences system, making for similar matches every season which was boring, and lastly, Will winning. So Will and his good friend Christian would make a plan for Christian to be the co-commissioner for the Season 5 tournament, with Christian having power over the scheduling and rules, with Will not doing the best job last season as a commissioner. Christian and Will would finally do what the people wanted, a double elimination bracket. You're going to hear me complain a lot about the problems with this bracket over the next 6 seasons. And this time, there would be 12 players competing in this tournament, the new standard, as 16 would make it really hard to find all those players, relying on randoms and making the rounds take longer overall. Everyone, of course, starting 0-0, would be completely randomized for their matches. Then, all 1-0 players would play all 1-0 players in round 2, essentially a winner's bracket, and all 0-1 players would play all 0-1 players, essentially a loser's bracket. And for round 3, there would be 3 remaining 2-0 players. And now here's where the main problem of the bracket is. One player would randomly get picked and have a bye week to the semifinals, while the other 2 3-0 players would play, and the winner of that would get a bye week to the semifinals, and the loser of that would be in the quarterfinals. As for the losers bracket side, round 3 would have 6 overall players being 1-1, because the losers bracket would have 3 winners, they would be 1-1, and the winners bracket would have same thing, 3 players 1-1. And yeah, they would play each other. So yeah, round 3 would have 6 overall players being 1-1, all playing each other, and simply the winners of those games would advance to the quarterfinals. The playoffs consisted of 3 rounds, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals. All fights till the other player gets eliminated, which in case of the quarterfinals would be 1 game, since everyone competing in a quarterfinals game would be 2-1. And for the semifinals, it was a little more complicated, but pretty much it would be a player with a 3-1 record playing against a player that is undefeated from a bye week, either 3-0 or 2-0. And the player with 1 loss would have to win twice to advance to the finals, while the player with no losses would need to only win once to advance to the finals, since they are the higher seed essentially and haven't lost yet. And same with the finals, it would just be a fight till elimination, either 1 game if both players had 1 loss, or same rules as the semifinals if one player was undefeated and the other one had 1 loss, or it would be a best of 3 if both players came into the finals undefeated. Overall, a decent bracket that had some problems that Will, over time, would grow to hate. Another new rule that was added was that the score limit across every game would be 30 instead of 20. This, in theory, didn't sound like a bad idea, but I will explain later on why it could be problematic. But still, all of this was way better than the single elimination Season 4 and below style, and brought some new life to tournaments. But now, we arise an even bigger problem. The bracket was fixed, the conferences were abolished, but there was still one more major issue. Will. Everyone at this point was growing very tired of seeing Will winning, getting repetitive and boring for the viewing standpoint. And with Fation, Will's biggest rival, not playing in tournaments anymore for unrelated reasons, this would surely make for a walk in the park for Will to win his 3rd straight and 4th championship overall. But really briefly, we will go over all the participants in the tourney and see which players would have the best chance of taking down Will. Having a good amount of players coming back from last season, such as Will himself, Christian, Josh, Sammy, Chris C, Peter, Matosh, and Siddharth. And there of course was 1 returning player from previous seasons, Trayvon, and there were a few new faces to the tournament, Adriel, not to confuse him with the great Adrian, Jason, and Mike S, which was actually Sammy's brother, and also not to confuse him with the other Mike. Now immediately, looking at this, about half the players had no chance of beating Will. Sammy, a very good player who just came off of back-to-back finals losses versus Will, was very good, but it would be tough for him to have to bring down Will twice, even though Sammy was very good at BO3. Trayvon, a good player, but took a 1-year break from COD and came off an awful 20-13 loss versus Trout in his last tourney, looking mediocre at best in tourneys and would stand no chance of beating Will. Josh, the player that trained Baby Will, and Will's longest rival, would do decently against him outside of sniping tournaments, but Josh has been heavily disappointing in his tournament career so far, only making 1 semifinals appearance and losing in round 1 and 2 in his other seasons. Would be way too far-fetched for him to have a good chance of suddenly beating Will twice. Who did this leave? Chris C, a player who was looking to improve greatly, training with Trayvon, Jason, and Will, constantly trying to get better. But it was only Chris C's second COD, and though he was improving greatly, it was too far out of his reach to beat Will twice in a tourney. So with this being said, there was only one person who had a chance of taking Will down. And that, of course, was Christian. Christian was already a great player, but suffering back-to-back round 2 losses in his last 2 tourneys, would really need to step it up a notch to win this one. And Christian, for unrelated reasons, would become a very good player. Playing a lot, training, playing UMGs with Will quite often, improving his setup, getting a monitor and control freaks which improved his game a lot. He was the only hope of beating Will. Anyways, getting into round 1, the randomizers would choose these matches. And our first match had Will, the back-to-back champion, playing Sammy again in a rematch from the last 2 finals, but this time in round 1. Sammy was a very good player in BO3, but Will might be too much for him. Sammy, making a very impressive effort in this game, putting up his best game yet versus Will, but would unfortunately come up short. Sammy would show that he could hang with anyone after this game, and would have to make a loser's bracket run. For our next game, we had a fairly evenly matched game between Chris C and Trayvon. Trayvon being a small favorite to win this game, but let me give you some backstory to this. So, there were 3 players that would train actively for this tournament together, and those players were Chris C, Trayvon, and Jason. Now, they had a funny effect when they would 1v1 each other, called the triangle effect. Pretty much, Chris C would usually get the better of Trayvon when they played, but Trayvon would usually get the better of Jason when they would play. But very oddly, Jason would always get the better of Chris C when they would play. A very odd effect, but despite this, Trayvon was the favorite to win because of his overall COD experience, and Chris C being 0-2 to start his tournament career. But how would this match play out? Turns out, we should have listened to the triangle effect, as Chris C would get his first career tournament win with a convincing 30-23 win versus Trayvon, with a nice comeback as Trayvon was up 16-11 at one point, with Chris C taking the rest of the game over. Our next match had Adriel, a new player to tourneys, a decent sniper, versus Siddharth, one of the worst players of all time. And by the way, I just want to note now that Nuketown was our permanent map for this tourney, and also, the only specialists that were allowed were the ones that would not kill the opposing player, or a gun specialist. Examples are Psychosis from the Reaper, or Active Camo from Spectre. Anyways, the match went as expected, with Siddharth making Adriel look like prime Will or Christian, winning 30-5 and setting the single game record at the time. Our next match had Josh versus Jason. Josh, a very disappointing sniper in his career so far, only making one semifinals appearance in 3 seasons, would get his chance here against the new sniper, Jason. A decent player, but new to sniping overall and would be a huge underdog in this game. Josh would finally come through, winning 30-18, though it started off scary for Josh, being down 3-8 at the beginning, but he would take the rest of the game over to move on to round 2. Next, we had Christian versus Matosh, an insanely lopsided game with Matosh potentially being the unluckiest player of all time, playing Fation, Will, and Christian in his first 3 career games, and Christian would completely dominate the whole way, with Matosh lagging all over the place and Christian tying the single game record at the time, winning 30-5. For our final round 1 match, we had Peter versus Mike S. Peter, coming off a bad 0-2 start to his career so far, was looking to improve for BO3, and Mike S making his debut as a decent player. This should be an even match. Even match it was, Mike S winning in a great battle. The game very close the whole way through, with Mike closing it out at the end to win 30-25. Round 2 is underway, and so far, Christian looking very dominant, Will, of course, getting a good close win versus Sammy, Chris C getting a convincing win versus Trayvon, Adriel and Josh both getting convincing wins, and a great bounce back win for Josh, and Mike getting a clutch win versus Peter. As for the losers bracket, Matosh actually forfeits in round 2 for unknown reasons, which is a shame because he probably would have beaten Siddharth. Trayvon looking shaky against Chris, but having a chance to bounce back in the losers bracket. Jason looking decent, but outmatched versus a very good opponent. Sammy losing against the great Will in a very close game, and Peter playing honestly the best game of his career so far, but losing in a close fight versus Mike S. The first match of round 2 would be a great one. Finally, we would get to see what people wanted to see in the AW finals, Will versus Josh, the oldest rivalry, student versus teacher. This would be time for Josh to prove himself. Josh honestly putting up a great effort, keeping the game close until the end game where Will would get 6 straight kills to ultimately win the match 30-20. Our next match, another very lopsided game with Christian versus Adriel. Christian and Adriel both got 30-5 wins against their opponents, Adriel's against Siddharth, but this time, Adriel wouldn't be the one dominating. Christian, on fire so far, winning 30-10 against Adriel, looking really good in his first 2 games so far. Our next match, and our first losers bracket match, we have Trayvon versus Jason. Now, this is one of the matches of the triangle effect between Chris C, Trayvon, and Jason. And Trayvon usually got the better of Jason when they would play. Would this come true in the tournament? Trayvon, finally looking sharp after 3 terrible tournament games in a row, almost looking like his old self, winning 30-20. Unfortunately, Jason would get eliminated from this loss. Our next match would see Peter versus Sammy. The loser gets eliminated, and Sammy, a big favorite in this game, as Peter did come off a close win, but that was versus Mike S, and Sammy came off a close-fought game with Will. So Sammy, still being a great BL3 player, would bounce back heavily in this game, winning 30-15, dominating the whole way, and Peter would be eliminated to start his career off 0-4. Our final round 2 match would be the last match of the winners bracket, Mike S versus Chris C. Chris C, getting his first career win versus Trayvon last round, and looking like a better player overall, would have a fairly tough match ahead of him, with Mike S coming off of a close win versus Peter, looking decent in that game. Chris C still being the favorite, but would he be able to come out of this game with a W? Chris C looking really good. The game being close the whole way through, with Chris C maintaining a serviceable lead, would take it away at the end, with Mike S also looking good but suffering a hard-fought loss. That was a pretty good game. Round 2 has ended. Matosh, Peter, and Jason all being eliminated. Christian getting the bye week to the semifinals, still looking very dominant in this tournament. Will and Chris C are the last of the winners bracket, aside from Christian. And our first round 3 match is an insanely lopsided match with Trayvon playing against Siddharth. And no need to waste your time, Trayvon won easily, looking very sharp versus Siddharth, 30-9 victory. Unfortunately, the footage got lost. Trayvon moving on to the quarterfinals, and Siddharth getting eliminated. Our next match had Sammy versus Adriel. Sammy, a good favorite to win this game, as Adriel was mediocre at best, and Sammy just coming off an insanely dominant win versus Peter, looking to keep it going against Adriel, and that's exactly what he did, dominating the match from start to finish, winning the game 30-14 to move on to the quarterfinals. Our last winners bracket match of the season had Chris C, a player who has improved greatly from his AW tournament days, but had a super steep hill to climb here, playing Will, the back-to-back champion who hasn't lost a single game since Season 2. This would be a huge test for Chris C. Will, in dominant fashion, destroying Chris C, fooling around a little at the end to eventually make the score 30-20 and moving Will on to the semi-finals, and Chris C would be moving on to play Sammy in the quarterfinals. Our last regular season matchup had Josh, who was coming off of a loss to Will, in which he played decently in, and he would be playing Mike S, a player who has won and lost a close game this season, and was looking like a solid player, but Josh was a good favorite going into this game, with his true skills finally starting to show. my god. And surely, the best game of the season so far, Josh, having a nice 5-2 start to the game, would completely go back to his choker form in tourneys, looking sluggish, and actually losing by a good margin, 13-17 at one point, and even losing 24-26 at one point before finally waking up and securing the win in an intense match to move Josh on to play Trayvon in the quarterfinals. The first game of the quarterfinals was a highly anticipated game, Sammy versus Chris C. Sammy was a small favorite to win this game as he's a back-to-back finalist and hasn't lost a game to someone besides Will since Season 2, on fire in these last two games, winning 30-15 and 30-14, while Chris C, another good player who has lost in round 1 in both of his first two seasons, but making a very large improvement, looking like a good player in Season 5, making his first quarterfinals appearance. This should be good. Chris C, pulling off a great win and a very nice comeback, being down 17-10 at one point before completely turning the game around, winning 27-21 and making Sammy rage quit. And this would be Sammy's first non-will loss since Season 2, which funnily enough was also a rage quit. So Chris ultimately won the 30-21. Moving on, Chris C to play Christian in the semifinals. Our next and last quarterfinals game was Josh versus Trayvon. Josh, a decent favorite going into this game despite his mediocre performance against Mike S, barely winning that game. But, to Josh's credit, his late game was great in that game, and his other two games saw him playing well. Trayvon, on the other side, had a pretty rough round 1 performance versus Chris C, but got back on track, beating Jason 30-20 and beating Sid 30-9. Josh, potentially playing his most impressive game of all time, finally looking like he's in form, winning convincingly 30-20, keeping a good lead throughout the entire game and moving on to play Will in the semifinals. Our first semifinals game, Christian versus Chris C. Chris C, coming off a great win versus a great player in Sammy, looking very impressive throughout this whole tournament, but this was truly the next step for him as he would be playing Christian. Christian so far looking super dominant in this tournament, but now it was time to test whether Christian could still dominate a good player. Christian, not missing a beat, would completely shred Chris C, winning 30-10 and looking ready as ever for the finals. Chris C, having a solid start to the game, but was just completely outmatched once Christian started to get his rhythm going. Christian would be moving on to his second finals appearance. Our last semifinals game is the rematch, Will versus Josh. Again, Will, still being the favorite to win this game and still the tournament, on fire, not losing since Season 2. For Josh, it's now or never. Josh, giving it his all, but Will is honestly just too good for Josh. The student outrises the teacher. Josh, keeping it a close, competitive game for quite a while, but Will would absolutely take over the late game, taunting and switching classes mid-gunfight and still winning it, would move on to the finals to play Christian in their Season 1 finals rematch. The finals, Will versus Christian, the rematch from the Season 1 finals. Christian, looking very good in this tournament, winning every game, dominating everyone in his path, but Will, oh man. Third straight finals appearance, 3 championships, going for number 4, 12-game winning streak in tournaments, losing last in Season 2. Will has been completely untouchable. Christian was the only one left in his way from essentially ending sniping tournaments. It was all up to Christian. Christian stamped his mark, playing the best game we have ever seen to this day. Games, I should say. Not only did Christian win, but he absolutely destroyed Will in both games. Complete destruction. Christian winning his first championship, winning in a season where he was simply godlike. Christian has done it. He has brought back variety in tournaments, marking himself as a top player for time to come. What a video that was. And now we are in the final section, the awards, whatever you want to call it. Here we are, final section of the video. Let's start off. The best match of the tournament goes to Mike S versus Josh round 3. The thing is, the matches in this tournament weren't that good. There wasn't too many super close matches besides this, and I think Mike S versus Chris C, which is funny. I think Mike S is in like the most close games in this tournament. But yeah, this match was honestly one of the more underrated matches of all time. Mike S actually was an underdog going into this game, like kind of a big underdog, and he had control most of that game, and Josh clutched up at the end to win 30-27. This was a crazy game. Mike S is kind of the Craig before Craig in terms of camping behind the car in Nuketown. He wasn't really hardcore doing it like Craig was later on, but he definitely was a little bit, and I think it threw some people off, and he wound up having a close game with Chris C and Josh in this tournament, and this game was really good, so I would say this is the best match of the tournament. The best underdog story of the tournament goes to Chris C. Now, there wasn't too many underdog stories in this tournament. I would say really the only two that you could argue for is Chris C and maybe Mike S. The thing with Mike S is he didn't actually win any games he was an underdog in, but he managed to get very close in games that like the odds were against him in. So maybe for that reason, but I would say Chris C deserves this award more than anyone else because he made the semifinals, and that was definitely a big jump from losing in round 1 in the last 2 seasons to making the semifinals. And getting 2 underdog wins against Trayvon in round 1 and Sammy in the quarterfinals was definitely big for him. So I would say Chris C is the biggest underdog story of the tournament. The most loved sniper of the tournament goes to Christian. Now I would say there's a few people that could have won this award. I would say Chris C was definitely honorable for this award. I would say Mike S or maybe even Sammy could have won this award potentially, but I would say Christian deserves this the most because he did beat me in that season, and that was definitely a big turning point for sniping tournaments. And if I had won that, it definitely would have been like it would have been in a way worse spot because I would have won 3 in a row, and Christian getting that win against me was definitely huge. And I think that alone is the reason why he's the most loved sniper of the tournament. Also, I mean, just his improvement. Like, we already knew Christian was a great sniper. Like, he was already great before this tournament, but this tournament was just, like, an insane jump. Like, he went from a good player to, like, a godlike player in just, like, one game, pretty much, because he grinded a lot for BO3, and that's pretty much when he made his jump to, like, basically a GOAT-level player. So I think just that improvement and like his willingness to grind and compete, I think just that alone what makes him the most loved. The most hated sniper of the tournament goes to me again. This is obvious. I was not liked. I wasn't like super cocky. The only one I really messed around with is Josh, just because it was funny and it was all in good fun. But people just didn't like that I won because it was boring, and like I understand, honestly, it is just boring when someone just wins over and over again. So I think just for the same reason as last season, I am here, and also, you know, Tahir, Adrian are not in the tournaments to take that spot, so for that reason, it is me again. The biggest disappointment of the tournament goes to me. Now I know what you're thinking. I made a finals. How could this be me over like maybe someone else? I don't know, but here's my argument for this. I think if I had made that finals game close with Christian, I would not have given myself this, but I think it's how I lost in that finals game to Christian. Like, it was like I got my ass whooped in both games, and I think that match was like really highly anticipated. By the way, a fun fact about that finals, I was, of course, the favorite just because I had won already 2 before, but I wasn't a huge favorite because me and Christian actually would 1v1 each other quite frequently in BO3. And it was, every game was like super close, 30-29, 30-28, like every single game was super close. So if I had made that finals game close, I think it would have definitely been a more fun story, honestly. So I think for that reason alone, I just like I played awfully in that finals, and for that reason alone, I have to win this award. And most people that were like expected to do good did do good and made the playoffs, so I think this award definitely deserves to go to me. We have a nice new award, and just let me know how you think about this. It kind of ties into the underdog thing a little bit, in my opinion, but I just wanted to test this out, because I thought this would be a fun award for especially the next few seasons and this one. But, anyways, the most improved player of the tournament goes to Chris C. Now, this is what I mean about the tying to the underdog story, but pretty much the most improved player is just, like, making a big jump from last season to this season. And I would say definitely Chris C earns this award. Like I said, Christian made a huge jump, but like I said before, Christian was already a good player, and he just turned into a great player. Chris C turned into a borderline, like, mediocre player to, like, an actual really good player in one tournament. So I would say that is definitely the most improved player. You could argue Trayvon as well because he lost in round 1 and he made the quarter, but I would say Chris C got some way more valuable wins, made way more meaningful wins. Sorry, can't speak. In my opinion, so, because beating people, like I said, he beat Trayvon in round 1, he was the underdog, and he beat Sammy in the quarterfinals, and he was the underdog in that game as well. And Sammy was, like, on a really good streak before he lost that to Chris C, so I would say definitely Chris C deserves this award. On a competitive scale, I would like to rank this tournament as 6 out of 10. This was another hard tournament to rank because a lot of people lost motivation, but a lot of the people that mainly lost motivation didn't even participate in this tournament anyways, so... And the thing about this tournament was there was a lot of, like, lower rank snipers at the time that were really working hard to train and get a lot better. Chris C, of course, was one of them that trained a lot, and he got a lot better, of course. Jason was another one, as you guys know, the legendary Jason. Wasn't super good in this tournament. This was his first tournament, and he was still training, kind of getting down the ropes to sniping. But he was training a lot. Even Trayvon, surprisingly. I know Trayvon didn't really care too much about these tourneys, but he actually did train a bit for this one. And then, of course, Christian improving a lot. Even Josh. We'll talk about Josh a little bit for these next few awards, but I think on a competitive scale, a lot of, like, good players competing a lot, but there was a lot of bad in this tournament. Of course, like, having Siddharth. Adriel was just, like, mediocre. Peter, at the time, like I said, Peter was still kind of developing, so he wasn't really that good at this time still. Matosh, of course, wasn't very good. So there was a lot of really bad players that I think bring this competitive scale down a lot. But for that reason, I rank it as 6 out of 10. On a fun scale, I would like to rank this tournament as 6 out of 10. I think this tournament was a really big breath of fresh air from Season 4, which was just kind of miserable, honestly. This tournament was definitely, like, a lot of people enjoyed this tournament, especially the way how it ended. It was way more enjoyable than the last season. And honestly, setting it up wasn't that bad, realistically, because, like I said, we only had 12, and it was way easier setting up from 16, and I actually don't think we had any randoms in this tournament whatsoever. Let me just think about it. Yeah, no, I think every single player in this was an IRL besides Trayvon, who I mean, he's basically an IRL at this point, like, from how much we know him. So, I would definitely say it was really easy to set up, which of course helps. The only thing that really sucks, I think, is, like I said, the matches weren't close, and that's what I was going to say at the beginning of the video. When we made the scores up to 30, in theory, that doesn't sound like a bad idea, but what that did is it makes it so a lot of the matches, like, ended up not being very close. Like, we didn't have many, like, we didn't have any nail-biters that whole tournament, which is just, you know, game point, 29, 29, 19, 19, whatever you want to call it. We didn't have any of those, not even, like, you know, 28, 30s, no really crazy matches that could have, like, ended, like, with one shot or anything. So I think that reason makes it a little bit less, but, I mean, I will say there was a lot of comebacks this tournament, which was really fun, and a lot of clutch moments, like, at the end, so... Like I said, 6 out of 10. It was definitely a breath of fresh air from Season 4, which was awful. And, yep. On an overall scale, I would like to rank this tournament a 6 out of 10, which makes this the 8th best tournament of all time. Really quickly, I just want to list the bad things about this tournament. First of all, the finals match was super disappointing. It was one of the most anticipated matches of all time, and I was really disappointing in that. The hope was that that match was going to be a lot closer of a game. But both games were just terrible. I got destroyed in both games. overall, throughout the tournament, there wasn't many close matches. So I think that reason makes this a little lower on the scaling. And in terms of players that had a real chance of winning, there wasn't many. In fact, it probably was just me and Christian that had a chance of winning. I know Josh was pretty good, Chris C was pretty good, Sammy, but I think realistically, me and Christian were the only two that had like a legit chance of winning, unless like some freaky upset happened. So I think that reason made it a little bit less good. But I think, but here, now we can go over the good things of the tournament. So the good things definitely is it was a fresh air from Season 4, and the double elimination brackets were very good. I think Chris C's underdog story was definitely really fun in that tournament. A new winner of this tournament was also very good for this tournament. Like, not the same winner back-to-back, because Season 3 I won, and then Season 4 it was the same thing, which is boring. So at least in Season 5 there was a new winner. That was definitely a good thing. Josh, actually, I want to talk a little bit about Josh for this as well. Josh definitely in his tournament career has been really disappointing, because he is supposed to be a guy that was like with me and Christian, supposed to rival me in AW, but has been disappointing. But I think Josh in this tournament was actually not disappointing, and his only 2 losses were to me in this tournament, which I think at this point I was a lot better than he was. So it's understandable for this tournament, and I think he played well in this tournament and actually showed flashes of like the good player that he is, because Josh is actually a really good player, but he just, like I said, was super disappointing in sniping tournaments. So I think it was nice that in this tournament we finally got to see Josh like actually, play up to his potential a little bit. So that was fun. And overall, like I said, it was just a breath of fresh air from the last season, and I think that's why overall it's a 6 out of 10. But I think it just balances each other out, if the matches were closer, I think overall it would have made it a little better. I think if the scores were up to 20 in the regular games, it would have been kind of fun for this tournament, but overall, like I said, big step up from Season 4, and it's a 6 out of 10. My personal favorite moment / best moment from the tournament, this is a weird one, honestly. This is super unexpected, and there's maybe a few things you could put, but I'm actually going to put Josh's back-to-back wins versus Mike S and Trayvon as the best moment of this tournament, because, like I said, it was tying into what I was just talking about, with Josh finally showing his true colors, like that he actually is a good sniper. Now, Josh in that Mike S game was pretty sluggish and not super good overall in that game, but towards the end, he really clutched up on, like, his past times in tournaments where he would lose against, like, Sammy or, like, Christian in the semifinals, but this time he clutched up and got a huge win versus Mike S to move on to the quarterfinals, and then against Trayvon, it was so amazing to watch, honestly. Like, as a person that really wanted to compete with Josh in those early tournaments, it was really nice to see Josh, like, play up to his potential in that quarterfinals game versus Trayvon. So I would say, honestly, that's the best moment of the tournament, but you could say Christian beating me in the finals is the best moment, which is a fine answer as well, honestly. The only reason I would not say is that's the best moment of the tournament is because it was just a boring match overall to watch, because it was just a blowout, and there was no chance I was winning that. Like, by the end, you could tell who was going to win that, of course. So, but you could argue that is the best moment, of course. You could even say Chris C beating Sammy in the quarterfinals with the Rage Quit comeback was a good moment. So, I'm okay with any of those being the best moment, but for me personally, I would say it's Josh's back-to-back wins in round 3 and the quarterfinals. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I don't know when Season 6 is going to come out. I might take a little break, because this editing, it came with a lot of... It was hard to edit this, and there was a lot of errors that were happening, so... Yeah, I'll take probably a little break, but we have some bangers coming out. Season 6 is definitely going to be really fun, so I'll see you guys for that one.